To introduce our guest speaker. Dr. Chaudhry is an endocrinologist who completed his medical school core internal medicine and endocrinology training at the UBC. He's currently completing an additional research fellowship with Dr. Tim Kiefer in the area of islet transplantation and advancing therapies for people with type 1. Specifically, and don't worry if you don't understand this sentence, he will investigate the use of mRNA-based biomarkers for studying the cell death and fate of transplanted islet cells, which may reveal ways to optimize and enhance their survival. Ultimately, he hopes to help support the clinical transplant and research team here in making Vancouver a major center for islet and stem cell-based therapy for patients living with diabetes and type 1 specifically. So, Dr. Chaudhry, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself and let us know when you want to start? Oh, I guess you can start your PowerPoint yourself.
Thanks very much, Trisha. Nice to see everyone here online. I'm just going to go ahead and share my slides before I talk further. Can everyone see that? Perfect. Okay, great. Yeah, so you can just call me Austin. I'm a new endocrinologist working at VGH, and I'm doing a little bit extra time focusing on in the research aspect in terms of the exciting breakthroughs that have been happening with stem cell transplants and type 1 diabetes. And really appreciate the opportunity to be speaking to you all today. I think it's very important as, a physician who, helps people living with type 1 diabetes manage their diabetes and involved in trials for such, that we take the time to kind of communicate what the developments that are happening in the field are, and then use it as also an opportunity to have that discussion with people about what next trials look like, and for us to design them with goals that are relevant to you in mind. How are these therapies going to address the aspects of diabetes that you find the most challenging? So I think it's always a fantastic opportunity to share and then have the discussion with you. So what I hope to do today is first just give a summary of all the exciting breakthroughs that have been happening, and then where they're going in the next year or two, and also use it as an opportunity to let you know about it in case you may be interested in participating. So we'll just go ahead and just really highlight that we are in 2025. We've had a milestone year. I think you'll see that a lot of people have been talking about stem cells, as 5 years away. It's always been a promise. I think we can confidently say that we are now in the era where stem cell islet replacement has been proven to work for people with type 1 diabetes. So, to tell you or to help kind of give the summary of where we are now, I think it's also helpful to know where we're coming from, what has been the standard of care for islet transplant previous to the last few years. So I just want to give this little summary here of what is islet transplantation. So it's been kind of first pioneered in the 1980s, and it didn't really take off until about the year 2000 when the Edmonton Protocol was, a breakthrough in terms of the first reproducible and mostly consistently successful protocol for islet transplantation. And what it does is historically it's involved taking a donor pancreas. So from a deceased donor, the pancreas is taken and it's brought to the islet lab, where the pancreas is essentially subjugated to a number of steps to isolate out the islet cells. And the islet cells are that specific part of the pancreas that make insulin, and the part that's, essentially missing in people with type 1 diabetes. So if you can take out the islets from that deceased pancreas, you can actually kind of get a little slurry, this kind of suspension of the cells. It's just shown on the right there. And then you can take that and put it in a bag, and the patient's taken to the radiology suite, where a radiologist will kind of visualize where the vein that goes into their liver is. They'll put a long IV catheter into that area, and then they literally just hang the bag and the islets infuse into the liver. I'd like to emphasize, it's always surprising for some people, but we actually don't put the islets into the pancreas. We put them in the liver. And the reason is the liver is kind of the next best place, and it's a lot easier to do any kind of interventions in there. So the islets actually get lodged somewhere in the liver. And ultimately, They just need to access the blood to kind of sense what the sugar is in the blood, and then they can make insulin and release it into the blood in response. And so, this has been done this has been done for about 20, 25 years or so now. And in Vancouver, we started this program in 2003. So we've learned a lot from the last 20 years of doing islet transplantation. What we've seen is that we don't always get 100% of the cells surviving. So the amount of people who get enough surviving cells that they can come off insulin is not been, as desirable as we would want. The rates are anyway from, 30 to 70% probably are off insulin in 1 year. And then most people, if they do get off insulin, they need to return back to requiring insulin within, an average of 3 to 4 years. And that just kind of reflects that the cells you got may slowly whittle away over time. But even if you don't have that huge, that large cell mass to come off insulin, what we have seen is even just putting back some cells in your body that are making insulin, it really helps people with managing their diabetes. So we've seen improved glucose control. We've also seen, and probably the single best benefit is that the amount of hypoglycemia that people get, especially those really dangerous low blood sugars, the ones where maybe your endocrinologist always asks for if you needed someone else to treat you, or you needed to call an ambulance, or you had a seizure. So it really abrogates or stops that. So despite those benefits, unfortunately, that has to have been, balanced against the risks. And that's the immunosuppression, or essentially the anti-rejection medications to prevent your body from rejecting someone else's cells. And, those include a lot, infections, kidney function. There's a long-term risk of skin cancers as well, usually 10 to 15 years out. Um, so we've really had to balance, identify that patient in whom we think the benefit outweighs these risks. And, also if someone who is faced with this feels that this is in line with their preferences in terms of their care. So, not a lot of transplants are done worldwide. I think we're lucky here in Canada. We're certainly a world leader, and including in Vancouver, we're fairly active. Especially the last few years, we've really kind of ramped up activity. 2025, we've actually broken our own record, and we've actually performed the most transplants in Canada this year so far. But it's only 13. You can see we're not doing a ton of islet transplants, and that's just reflecting, you have to wait for a donor to become available, and then you have to find someone in whom the benefits outweigh the risks. And that usually equates to someone who's had really difficult to control diabetes. Like they're having a lot of dangerously low, severe hypoglycemic episodes. So, that means the field has been, uh, a lot of experience has been accrued with this, but we really haven't been able to have islet transplantation take off as a functional cure for most people with T1D. So there's two big issues that I identify. One is the supply, and one is the immune suppression. So thankfully, we now have a solution for the supply. So those are the stem cell trials. So what these involve is some labs have figured out how they can take a stem cell line. So in the lab, they grow out all these cells, and then they coax the cells into turning into insulin producing islet cells. So you can essentially mass produce these islets within a lab, and then you can kind of bank them and ship them off to be transplanted to someone. And so people have been working on this for, 10 years, maybe even 12, if I'm exact with the dates. But as of 2024 and 2025, we can now say that they have been clinically proven to work. So this is a landmark study that just came out a few months ago in the New England Journal of Medicine. And, I think I know the Blue Jays are going another big win for Canada and Toronto. The first author on this paper, Trevor Reichman, is a surgeon in Toronto, so a really good also Canadian presence. What this company called Vertex, what they did is they manufactured these stem cells and then they gave it to people.
Austin, can you speak louder? I mean, for some reason, the volume went down for me. Caleb,
Sure.
did it go down for you?
It did go down for me as well.
Okay,
Okay.
yeah. Can
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
project? I'm
Are,
not
are
sure
you able to
why.
hear me better now?
It's still kind of like you're far away.
Okay. I'm trying to be very close to here. Let's see if I increase.
Yeah, so someone says volume is down for them as well.
Okay, how about now?
Better. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
just gonna tell you to just project.
yeah. So
Oh, it's back
there's
to
a
normal. Yeah.
yeah, there's a feature that says automatically adjust microphone volume. So for some reason, Zoom was thinking I was speaking too loud. So great. I just put it on manual and put it to max. So yeah, if everyone can hear me, give me a thumbs up. Perfect. So yeah, so this is the landmark paper, and what they showed is they took these stem cell islets. They did the same procedure that I showed you earlier, where they put it through the portal vein infusion. It does require immunosuppression in this one because it's still someone else's cells, even if it's made from stem cells. From your body's perspective, it's someone else's cells. But with that, they were able to show that 10 out of the 12 patients that they infused achieved insulin independence. That means they were off insulin completely by 1 year. So this is the first time that we've been able to show that taking stem cells, turning them into islets, and giving it to people can cure their diabetes. There are important questions still that remain. So this is, of course, a huge breakthrough. One is we don't know how long the cells will last for. As I've told you, we've seen from our cadaveric, like our donor islets, that the benefits usually last for a few years. We're not sure if you get this as for life, or do you need maybe a top up every few years? So longer term studies will show that. And we also don't know, I mean, we still have to give immunosuppression. So there's still that risk that someone's taken on. Um, but just to let you know, we finished recruiting for this particular trial, and we completed the last transplant here in Vancouver in August. Multi-center trials, many different participants in the world. And Vertex is the company is planning to initiate submissions to the FDA next year to hopefully put this on the market within the next few years. And they're calling their stem cell product Zim-Ilosil. I find the medication names that companies are coming up with nowadays very, very strange, but that's the one they're going with. So that's what we're calling this product, Zim-Ilosil. Um, we are recruiting for kind of a follow-up study to this, is where we're doing these stem cells in patients who have had a prior kidney transplant. So as you know, some people who have longstanding diabetes may develop kidney failure and they go on to get a kidney transplant. The kind of favorable thing in this situation is that if you've had a kidney transplant, you're already on immunosuppression. You're already taking those medications. So we're not asking you to take on a lot more risk by giving you the islets. And so this is a population that may really benefit from this kind of therapy. And so, if you know, or if you have someone that you know who's had a kidney transplant before, and they have type 1 diabetes, and they've, not had any kind of other islet or pancreas transplant, it's someone that we are, potentially still open to looking at for this trial. But like I said, the big issues here are the need for immunosuppression. So that's kind of where the frontier is going. So, I mentioned it took us 20 years from the 1980s to 2000 to get the first Edmonton protocol. And then, from year 2000 to now the 2020s, another 20 years to get stem cells. I hope it doesn't take another 20 years. I'm confident that, as I'll show you, that we're not going to have to wait another 20 years for the next big breakthrough. But there's a lot of exciting stuff here. And this is the next big hurdle before cell therapy can really take off for people with type 1 diabetes. Um, and on this journey, there's going to be failures, there's going to be successes. So starting off with the failures, we just saw in the last trial, the VX880 is the formal name for that trial. The stem cells worked when you put them in through the portal vein, and you had to give them anti-rejection meds. But this company then tried to put them in a device that was the idea being that the membrane on the device will protect the cells, like prevent the immune system from getting in and attacking the cells, but still allowing oxygen and nutrients to get in. And so they loaded them in these devices and put them under the skin, and they did not give them any anti-rejection meds. Unfortunately, they did see some cells surviving, but not enough to make any kind of benefit to the patient's diabetes. There wasn't a lot of insulin that was produced. So they decided, they won't be advancing any further in these trials. Another trial that we have been very active here in Vancouver, we were working with a company called ViaCyte and then CRISPR that used stem cells that CRISPR is, as you may have heard or have some exposure to, and if not, essentially what it is a technology to do genetic editing. So it can change some genes in the cells. And specifically, what they did is they changed genes that would make the cells not be recognized by your immune system, and also try to boost some of the cells' survival and robustness against stressful conditions. And we also put them in a device, and we implanted them under the skin, and we also do not give them any long-term anti-rejection medications. So we completed this trial. We started it in 2023, finished last year or so. And I've also been working on some adjunct studies to this as well, looking at, as Trisha mentioned at the talk, whether there's any biomarkers of cell survival that we can get. I unfortunately can't share the results publicly with you at this point. The company is asking us to kind of hold off for a couple more months, and then we'll have the opportunity to talk more about it at the end of 2025. But what I can tell you is that, this study, all of this kind of effort was really designed in mind for the kind of the flagship study, which is the one that's the next in this line, the what we call CTX 213. And that's going to take all these insights we've learned from gene editing, and we're going to hopefully have a study that's going to look to see if these cells can be delivered to someone in a large mass without needing immunosuppression, and see if they can get them off insulin. So we're talking with the company right now to plan that trial, and working with Health Canada. We're looking at this point, probably early 2027. And so hopefully this time next year, I'll be able to start kind of sharing some details about what recruitment criteria will look like. But something to keep in your mind, I think, in the next 2 years, that this could be a really interesting immunosuppression-free stem cell trial. On that note, it's not just this company, but there's another company, and it kind of shows you there's a lot of interest in this space, and there's a lot of investment being put into this. And this company called Sana, what they did, and this is another landmark moment for the field, is they, instead of taking stem cells, they wanted to first test if the gene edits work just on regular islet cells from a deceased donor, like the old way of doing islet transplant that I showed at the beginning. So what they did is they worked with this in the study. They did one patient just as a test. They took cells from a deceased donor. Before they transplanted that into the recipient patient, they actually took the cells to the lab and they did some genetic editing. And they changed some genes again also with that make the cells, be invisible to the immune system, essentially. I think the best way I can think of it is if you have, like a car, right? If you have some logo, maybe you have the brand of the car, like a Toyota, or the name Toyota written, and you've got an attendant going through the parking lot, and he's recognizing all the cars that way. And that's kind of how your immune system works. All this, your immune cells are looking for these little tags on your cells to see if it's foreign, if it's your own cell. But in this case, if you just take off the tag, like instead of changing it, if you just take it off, the immune system doesn't know what to do. It just says, I don't know what this is. It just moves on. Can't recognize it as foreign or self. So that's kind of what they did in this study. And they showed that the cells survived without anti-rejection medications. And they just did a little test study. So you can see here, apologies if the picture is a little bit graphic, but it's just showing you that they implanted it in the muscle, and just some of the gene edits there. And they showed that they measured insulin production, which is the way we measure it, is something called C-peptide. If you see that, that's just a marker of how much insulin is being produced. And they showed that that level remains steady even, months out without any anti-rejection medications. And so this was just kind of like their test study, but this is actually really impressive because this is the first demonstration of transplanted cells surviving in someone without immunosuppression. And because of this, they're really excited about their next stage. So they've been working on their own stem cell line, and they've put these gene edits in their stem cell line. So their idea is, they can mass produce these cells, and hopefully it'll be invisible to the immune system. And they're actually pretty close to getting ready for clinical trials, probably by late 2026, early 2027 too. So I've had the opportunity to chat with their leadership, and Vancouver, you know, across all the trials that I mentioned, we've actually performed the most amount of stem cell transplants for type 1 diabetes in the world. So we are a world leader in this space, and this company is quite excited to work here as well, and will likely be one of their first sites. And so we're just kind of discussing with them. So again, hopefully within a year, I'll be able to tell you a little bit more about what the recruitment criteria will look like. But this is another trial of a potentially immunosuppression-free stem cell approach. So it's just kind of an overview of stem cells. And of course, after I'm done, I'm very happy to take any questions. I just wanted to shift gears a little bit about another exciting area for type 1 diabetes. And that's, what about preventing or slowing down type 1 diabetes? And so, this is something you may hear more and more about, and that's because now we can have medications to do something with this knowledge. But we've kind of understood type 1 diabetes is occurring in stages. Stage one being you have antibodies, you have your immune system that is developing, abnormal recognition of your insulin producing cells, but it hasn't really caused any damage yet. There's antibodies there. Your sugars are, glucose is normal. But we know people who have those antibodies have a high risk of going on to getting diabetes. And, by the time you're in stage two, that means that you have had early damage occur, that your blood sugars are just a little bit abnormal. Maybe they're in the pre-diabetes range, but you don't have overt diabetes. You don't have those symptoms of really high blood sugars, or, unfortunately, as it happens for some people, they know they have diabetes when they go to hospital and they get diagnosed with DKA. So this is kind of that really early stage. By the time you have stage two, you're pretty much guaranteed to go on to get full-blown type 1 diabetes sometime in your life. So it's a very important thing to kind of recognize. And stage three is kind of, you have over type 1 diabetes. You have the classic high blood sugars, and you have to manage it with insulin. So now there has been a medication that's available. It's teplizumab. Brand name is called Tzield. And what it does, what's been shown to do is if it's given to people who have stage 2 type 1 diabetes, so they have antibodies, but they haven't gone on to get, maybe some mild early rise in blood sugars, but not really overt diabetes, it can actually slow down the progression to getting full type 1 diabetes. The studies have shown by about 2 years or so. And it's a big change in the way we think about diabetes, because this is not just, replace like treating the consequence of diabetes, which is high blood sugars and not enough insulin, but it's actually targeting the root cause, which is the immune attack against your insulin producing cells. And so it's kind of this first step into this new era where we have immune therapy, as we call it, to try to reduce that autoimmune attack against your insulin, your islet cells. So we are also looking at a kind of another study where if you've just had a recently diagnosed type 1 diabetes, so this may not apply to people here. If it does, there's a great opportunity to chat about it. But if not for you, then definitely something to keep an eye out for your friends or families, for anyone that you know who has got a new diagnosis of type 1 diabetes in the coming months. We're doing a study to see if we give this drug, does it slow down the immune attack on your remaining insulin cells in the body? By the time you present with type 1 diabetes, you lost 90% of those cells, but there are 10% that are there. And we're thinking if we can try to protect them, then that will help kind of improve the diabetes control and insulin needs for at least a few years. The way I think about this is it's not going to necessarily cure or prevent type 1 diabetes from happening, but it will make it really, much more easier to manage for that person who's still getting used to the new life of having to live with type 1 diabetes, as some of you may know, and it's just a life-changing diagnosis. You have just thrown into all these different things you need to know every, your day, your activities. You need to know how they affect your blood sugar. So it's just a huge learning curve. So if you have something that kind of slows down the course of the disease and allows people an easier time to kind of manage the early part of their years living with diabetes, we think it might be helpful. And so I think it was probably within the next month or two will be set up, and we're looking to kind of recruit people 17 to 25 years of age with a new diagnosis within 8 to 12 weeks of diagnosis to see if this medication can kind of help them. Um, well, the reason I mentioned this is that this is just kind of the first foray. There's a lot of other trials in the pipeline too that are kind of building on this whole concept of targeting the immune system. So right now, we're talking about stage 2, talking about stage 3. I think in the future, we're going to be talking a lot more about, earlier intervention, potentially kind of a long-term vision, maybe even prevent type 1 diabetes from happening completely in someone who's at risk. So, one interesting thing I didn't include on the slide here, but I just recently learned, the company is offering free antibody testing to people who have a first-degree relative with type 1 diabetes. So, if you have siblings or children who don't have type 1 diabetes, and you kind of want to know if they have antibodies and then could be eligible for teplizumab or Tzield as its brand name, or any of the other drugs in the pipeline. BC Diabetes, which is here in Vancouver, is partnered with Sanofi, the company, to offer kind of free antibody testing for people who have primary relatives with type 1 diabetes. So I think it's uh, something that's open for people who are interested in and kind of have that information. So with that, just kind of wanted to thank you all for your attention. This is supposed to be kind of an overview, and then I envision the next part we can have a lot of discussion about uh, uh, specific aspects of this.
Thanks, Asen. All right, so we're going to take the PowerPoint down, and then I'm going to go ahead and start asking Dr. Chaudhry the pre-submitted questions that you all had given us. So the first, and feel free to submit or type in the chat box questions that come up spontaneously. So our first question in the category of eligibility and participant criteria, who would be the ideal candidate for this treatment? And so you talked about several studies. So you can talk about eligibility criteria for the several studies that are either currently going on or are going to be launched soon, and who would not be a good candidate?
Yeah, these are very good questions. And as you just mentioned, it depends on the study. So the ones that I had just shown you, the Vertex one, where we've seen these pretty strong results, these have been very restrictive. They've been looking for patients who have very difficult to control diabetes. So they included people who've had, 2 or more severe hypoglycemic episodes in the last year. And so that's not a lot of people. So I think their next iteration of studies will be a bit more open, but that has been the issue there. Of course, the one we are still recruiting for right now is for people who have had a kidney transplant. And so if that applies to you or someone you know, then that could be a criteria. I can tell you this, though, that the next 2 studies that I mentioned that are looking at that we're planning right now that we'll be looking at no immunosuppression. We're finalizing the details, but conceptually, what we're probably going to be wanting for this first batch are people who have had essentially well-controlled diabetes. So, A1C between 6 and 9.5%, without any significant complications, and ages 18 to 65. I think for the first one, because we just kind of want to show up that immune suppression-free strategy works, we're going to try to target that one. So it's in that sense that we're not looking for the severe end of it. We're kind of looking at the other end for the next one. So that might make it a bit more accessible for people. Certainly, this is early days. Trial criteria will always be a little bit more restrictive, and just to show that it's safe, that it works, and after that, they'll expand to more people. So you kind of got a little bit of a one end or the other, and the people in the middle. Um, it may not be in the first kind of generation of studies, but definitely second generation.
Okay, the person who submitted that question, would you like to follow up? Okay, Austin, I want to follow up. I remember in some
So there's
previous,
a question,
oh, there is a
follow-up,
question,
significant
sorry.
complications. Yeah. So that's a very good question. The reason I didn't get into any more, explanation of that is still something we're kind of ironing out. So at the very least, someone who has advanced kidney disease, so GF, like if you know kidney function, your GFRs probably looking for at least 45 or above. If people with very advanced eye disease, so if you've had especially recent history of eye bleeds, or you're actively needing laser or surgical treatment for that, um, or if you have really advanced heart disease, uh, then probably those, well, we're going to have to at least defer for now. If you've got mild eye disease or very mild borderline kidney disease, may not necessarily exclude you from the trial, but we're still kind of ironing out those details.
Okay, so the second question in the chat box is why is 65 the cutoff age?
I have asked the same question. You know, when you, as I've kind of gone through this, you start to understand that part of designing clinical trials, you have to work with regulatory agencies, and sometimes decisions are made that aren't always scientifically valid. I don't agree, just so you know. We pushed for higher than 65, but I think 65 has been chosen because most of the original trials that have looked into islet transplantation put that as the cutoff. Um, and so they've decided to leave those in now for the first generation of trials, thinking that, if you're 65 or above, statistically, you may have higher rates of other medical issues that might make you less of a candidate. I personally don't. I agree with the person who questions this. Like it's kind of surprising why it's such a hard cutoff. It is for now. In the future, and just so you know, like let's say the trials are done, they're successful, and this is on the market. I don't see 65 as being a contraindication or like a cutoff. It's going to be something case by case. If you're someone with 70 and you don't have any other medical issues and make it, risky to go with the procedure, we do that for the right cadaveric islet transplantations. We've transplanted people who are 70, so I think I would foresee the same. So it's not going to be age capped forever.
Okay, another question. You might have answered this, but what about if you have laser or vitrectomy, but retinopathy is stable for 8 years? Is that still significant complications?
Yeah, it's a very good question. For now, I think in the first generation, it'll be a case by case basis. Most likely, the companies will want us to avoid, but we made the argument that as you said, the key word is stable. If it's been stable for some time, and we see that whatever the reasons for getting it, that that's been addressed, it may not rule you out completely, but I think it's certainly something we would have to evaluate on a case by case. Um, that is just for the stem cell trials. I think for the first generation, it's important to know that islet transplantation has actually been shown to reduce the risk of further retinopathy or further eye complications in people who have had advanced eye disease. So we know it's beneficial for those people. It's just one of these other things in the first generation of trials. They just want to kind of select patients who they think are a bit more safe, and if there's any complications, then they it'll look bad if they're doing a study and there's a lot of complications. But later down the road, I would not consider or be worried that if you have advanced eye disease that you're going to be ineligible for any stem cells transplants, just maybe for the first generation of trials.
Okay, another question is, in terms of the screening, would the free testing include grandchildren?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not 100% sure. I think if you're interested, you can ask. My understanding is it's only just first degree relatives for now, because that's where the data has been, or at least what it's been approved for. Um, I think it's worthwhile to reach out and ask. But my suspicion is no. The answer is no.
Okay, in the same topic area, is there any age restriction for siblings to get tested for possibly developing type 1?
Uh, that's a good question. Let me just do a quick fact check here. I think there is. I want to say it's something like 25, but I think it's worthwhile checking still. Uh, the medication there, it's shown probably best to work for people who are kind of younger. So that's kind of why there seems to be a bit of an age cutoff. Um, and so I think that's off the top of my head, if I remember, about 25 or so.
Okay, next question, pre-submitted. Can we take part in upcoming trials if we have other autoimmune conditions?
Yeah, so having another autoimmune condition won't exclude you, assuming that it's controlled and you haven't had, like for example, if you have thyroid conditions, that's fine as long as you're on a relatively stable dose of replacement. And if you have Addison's disease, you're still eligible, also assuming that your doses have been okay and you haven't had any big issues with or frequent issues with adrenal crises in the last year.
Okay, next question. If you all had submitted that question, please feel free to jump in if you would like. Happy for you to do that after Asen answers. So when treatment for type 1 is ready, how will prospective candidates be prioritized? If they're all eligible, is there a priority ranking system?
Yeah, that's another important question. We're talking a lot. So, we've certainly talked about how it looks like we're not too far away from, I mean, we know stem cells work now. We're trying to figure out the immune part. It doesn't look like we're too far away from having this available for patients. The next big issue is going to be who can have access to it. What is coverage and funding going to look like? I think ultimately, obviously we're talking with the government. The government seems pretty on board to start funding this for people. So the details will be hammered out in the next few years. If I had a crystal ball, what I think will happen, I think it'll be something similar to how insulin pumps and CGMs were introduced. So, initially getting access to that was a bit tough, right? You had to have a more difficult to control diabetes. You had to hit certain criteria to make it sound like you'd be someone to really benefit from this higher level of technology. But that bar has been thankfully decreased over the preceding years. And now, for example, to get a CGM coverage in BC, at least by Pharmacare, you just need to be on multiple shots of insulin, um, and say that you'll work with your diabetes team. So that may be how it will progress for the first few years when this is on the market. Probably those with more difficult to control diabetes or ones who are, trying to leverage insulin pumps and CGMs but are still finding their diabetes control is not coming to target as they would like, or they're having ongoing progression of their complications. I'm anticipating that they'll be prioritized first, and then maybe over time, as more experience and kind of the cost of it comes down, uh, it'll be expanded out more. So that's just my crystal ball, based off how things have gone historically, but I think the next few years will be really telling. The cost may also come down as we invest more into local cell manufacturing facilities. So Vancouver is actually building a local cell manufacturing facility, so we could potentially grow our own local stem cell products in the future, which may also improve accessibility. And so that could change who gets prioritized as well, and making it more accessible to more people.
Okay, next question. As someone with type 1 for almost 50 years and stage 4 chronic kidney disease, can someone like me be a candidate for any of these studies?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So the stage 4 kidney disease is a tricky spot because we probably would not transplant you. And the reason for that is not because you wouldn't benefit, but because we are worried that you may need a kidney transplant in the future. And so the problem with doing transplants is every time you get cells, you can develop antibodies. Um, And that makes it difficult to find a match. So usually what we try to do in those patients is we wait until they get their kidney transplant first. And it's a bit of a difficult one. Like, could you slow down the need to get a kidney if you gave it? Um, the kind of the thinking right now is after you've had a kidney transplant, then you become a very ideal candidate, whether it's for a whole pancreas or whether it's for an islet transplant. So that's the tricky thing about this stage four. It's not so much you're not going to be eligible forever, but we'd at least have to take into account what's your likelihood of needing a kidney transplant, and if we think it's high, then we would wait until you get a kidney.
Okay, next question. You had mentioned, the top age limit is for most of these studies is 65, but is
Yes.
there a bottom?
Yeah, yeah. It's 18 for now. We're not doing any children. I think just for ethical reasons, we'll focus on adults first. But then, of course, in the future, children may be eligible. But for now, 18 to 65.
Okay. Next question. We answered it, but I just want to still articulate what the question is. I've been type 1 for 58 years, wondering if I would be eligible for a study. We definitely, or
Yep.
Austin definitely answered that, so I'm going to go on.
Yeah, if you're 58, you could still be a candidate.
Um, will will there be blood type requirements for these studies?
Yeah, yeah. Very good question. Very good question. It depends as well on the study. So with the Vertex one, right now they are restricting it to A and AB. That's just because they developed their stem cell lines from an A person, a person with an A blood group. Some of the upcoming ones, though, will not have a blood group restriction. So it's a bit of a variety right now where the current Vertex one does have a restriction, but the two upcoming immunosuppression-free ones will not have a blood group restriction. You know, um, I think that should be hopefully on Vertex's priority list too to develop it beyond A and AB, but that's just kind of their restriction right now.
Okay, next question. We're going into the topic area of treatment progress and efficacy. How close are we to reversing type 1 with stem cells?
So I can tell you that we have done it. It's been shown this year that you can reverse type 1 diabetes with stem cells. Question is, how long will that last for? Does someone need a top up every few years or so? That will be an important question for the field. And the second is, can we do it without immunosuppression? So that is now literally the $1 million question everyone's working on.
Okay, so along those lines, are there any side effects on stem cell treatment? I know there are different ones, but
Yeah.
what are the side effects for each type of treatment?
Yeah, very good. Also, very good question. So, let's quickly address if you need immune suppression, so that's one category. Obviously, there's a whole list of side effects there. I think I mentioned them like infections, cancers, usually skin cancer, uh, can be stress on your kidney as well. So you have to balance that. So let's say, of course, we've talked about trials that will hopefully, everything goes well, reduce the need or eliminate the need for immunosuppression. So if we take that out of the picture, um, the procedure itself is not very invasive, thankfully. So whether it's a portal vein infusion, that's not a major surgery. It's a big catheter that's put into your vein. So there are small risks of that. Obviously bleeding can occur or a blood clot can occur. Thankfully, rates we've seen only 5% of people will get a blood clot, and it's usually a small blood clot that goes away after a few months. Less than 1% have any significant bleeding. But of course, with any kind of procedure, you have that risk. With the stem cell itself, specific to the stem cell, there is a theoretical risk. And the reason why I kind of, all these studies have done small patients at a time and then monitor them, in that if you're growing any cells from stem cells, especially if you're doing any gene editing, there's a small concern that you could make, or the gene edit goes a little wrong and some gene gets edited that should not be changed. And that increases the risk for the cells to form a tumor. And so, a lot of focus has been put into making sure that that risk has been looked after. And so we've done a lot of, not me, but a lot of people have done a lot of animal studies for several years. We haven't seen any risks of tumor development. So far, in none of the human studies, we've seen any tumor development, but that's probably the number one theoretical risk that we have to watch out for, is especially as these go on for a couple of years, is there any risk that these cells can go on to form a tumor? Um, that's why, a lot of these cells will often be doing them in under the skin or whatnot, or they're engineering in some fail-safe switches that if you give a medication, it'll kill the cell just in case there's any risk for a tumor. So there are strategies being put into place for that, but that's certainly something that is worth mentioning.
Okay. I'm gonna skip over the ones that you haven't answered. My daughter has had type 1 for 3 years now. She is 19 years old. We have stem cells stored since birth. Should we continue to store these cells in the hope that they can be used as part of trials at some point?
Yeah, it's a good question. I assume this is referring to cord blood, but if not, I think pretty similar. So the short answer is those kind of stem cells will likely not be used for type 1 diabetes research. So those kind of stem cells are often used for people who ultimately may need a bone marrow transplant because they've had a blood cancer. So the kind of stem cells we're talking about, I think broadly it's worth mentioning here, there's two categories. There's someone else's stem cells, which is where we're in right now with all these studies. And you may be wondering, why are they doing that? Well, there's two advantages for that. One is if you take someone else's stem cells and you can modify them, you can kind of grow them in a lab, you can mass produce millions of cells ready to go. So just the cost and the affordability of it is much more economical. Second thing is then you can modify those cells, like as you're talking about here with gene edits, so that they're not recognized by your immune system. So you could have like a one size fits all strategy. And then that's kind of why everyone's been investing in that. But it's not the only way to do stem cells. The second way is, as we kind of alluded to here, is you can take your own cells, whether it's your banked stem cells or whether it's, and this is another active area of research, like you take your skin cells or your fat cells, you take them to the lab, you reprogram them back into stem cells, and then you program them back into islet cells. So you can grow your own islet cells from your skin cells or your fat cells. Now you're wondering, why aren't people focusing on that? There's two big reasons. The first is, of course, the cost. You can imagine for one person, you have to do this procedure and do all this. So it's just going to be like millions of dollars for every person. The second is, I mean, ultimately, what is type 1 diabetes, right? It's your immune system recognizing your cells and attacking them. So if you give back your own cells, ultimately your immune system will attack them again. So that's why, unless someone is editing the cells to make it unrecognized in the system or figuring out a device that works to protect it, we really probably won't be using our own cells for some time. And by the time we may have figured that out, probably they won't need to use your banked stem cells. Probably the technology that people are envisioning are they'll take your skin cells or your fat cells and do all this reprogramming and editing to make it exactly the way we want. Um, so that's probably the way your own stem cells may be used in the future, but unfortunately, that's like maybe at least 10, 20 years away. So in the meantime, it may be useful to keep your bank stem cells for other reasons, but it won't be helpful for type 1 diabetes, I think, at least in the foreseeable future.
For the person who asked that question, would you like to follow up with any questions? I'm not sure if you're on screen. Okay, the next question, what are the ethical guidelines for stem cell sourcing?
Yeah. So these stem cells are from, what we call, the medical term is induced pluripotent stem cells. So they have been from a donor who gave these cells actually usually decades ago, with approval, and they've been kind of grown out from there since then. So most of these cells are using established lines that are very old. So, in terms of whether or not, and these particular ones are from what we call induced pluripotent stem cells. So they took someone's donor cells, maybe a fat cell or a skin cell, and they reprogrammed them into islets. So, for example, the current study I showed did not use fetal cells, which is, of course, is a ethical consideration for some. it's not something that the field is averse to. So some people have been looking into using fetal embryonic stem cells. So that is an option, and it is being explored in some trials. But I think respecting everyone's ethical viewpoint on this may be helpful to know. But there are both options. Fetal or embryonic derived, or taken from what we call induced from someone else's skin or fat cell instead. But it's certainly an important discussion point for maybe when in the future we have multiple different companies, multiple different products, and you may have that option available to you to choose from.
Okay, the person who submitted that question, would you like to follow up? Okay, I'm going to read 3 questions that I'm fairly certain Austin has answered, but I just want to read them out loud. Are there any trials not requiring anti-rejection drugs? I think he talked about one study that doesn't use anti-rejection drugs. Number 2, how serious are the risks transplant patients face as a result of the suppression of their immune systems? I think he talked about side effects. If there's any additional that you want to add to that, let me know. And then 3, how confident are we to try stem cells on people? Can you rate the confidence out of 10? And so because these are all studies that recruit people, it would be a 10. So there is one question in the chat box from Brandon. Has there been any other studies other than stem cell and islet cells?
Could I just ask you to elaborate on that a little bit more in terms of specific studies examining aspects of type 1 diabetes, or?
Can I go on camera for this?
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah,
please. Hi, Brandon.
okay, makes it a bit easier. I'm just curious, like, what I mean is that other than the stem cell and isolate cells, has been any other studies on anything else other than those two, or are they just the two that studies have been done on?
Yeah, so in terms of let's say big breakthroughs or potential cures for type 1 diabetes, so that's certainly one wing. I think I could say, like, that's maybe, let's say there's 3 categories that I can think of that I had. The first category is stem cells and islet cells. The second is what we call immune prevention or immunotherapy. So I briefly mentioned one, but there's so many more studies going on. What they're doing is they're looking at, if you, especially the hope is, one day we'll do screening of people. We identify if you have the antibody that causes diabetes before you get diabetes. If we can identify you have it, can we give you this medication to tell your immune system, hey, don't attack the beta cells, give them a break, and actually prevent you get from type 1 diabetes, or the very least delay, or so that's also the second big category. And a lot of progress is being made in the last 2 years, and more studies of different drugs are planned too. The third category, we didn't talk about it here, but of course, is all the technology. So, the insulin pumps, and eventually the goal to get a fully closed loop insulin pump. So one could almost consider that there's a technological cure, cure in quotation marks. You still have diabetes, but hopefully the pump will be doing 99% of the work, and maybe you just have to troubleshoot if there's any mechanical issues, which we can't say right now with the current generation of pumps. As any of you who wear it know, you still have to do a lot of work. But the idea is maybe in the next 5-10 years that the pumps, with AI, will get more sophisticated. And then there's a cell therapy approach, which is potentially curing your diabetes by making your body produce insulin again. So I think those 3 are kind of the big areas for studies in type 1 diabetes, that are going to really make a promising big changes in the next few years.
All right. I don't see any more questions in the chat box. We got 3 minutes left. Does anyone have any burning questions? And if you do, please raise your hand. All right, I don't see anything. So we would like to thank Dr. Chaudhry for sharing his knowledge and expertise on stem cell therapy. We thank you all for, those of you who have attended and chose this over the J's. If you have a topic you want to see covered in future huddles, just, let us know. We're happy to find a person in that expert area. So have a good rest of the night. And of course, go Jays, go! Alejandro Kirk is my favorite player. So thank you again, Dr. Chaudhry.
Thank you. Everyone has a good evening and take care.